Conflict is inevitable in life, but how much of that conflict is caused by cultural difference? In this presentation, we'll look at intercultural conflict and review some tips of how to manage that conflict through understanding. But first, what about your own conflicts? What do they usually involve? Politics? Ethics? Do you see any patterns in your day to day conflicts? What level do your conflicts usually occur on? Inside your mind, between you and your friends, or between you and those other people over there behind the tree? Conflicts can occur at any level of the self and the self other relationship. It can be in your own head when you come into contact with something new or a revolutionary idea. You may have cognitive dissonance. This is marked by discomfort and anger. Sometimes it disturbs your sleep. Do you have any of these? The most common conflicts people point to is interpersonal conflict between you and your friend or parents or your neighbors. This is often marked by offense, defensiveness, or anger. How about examples of these? These interpersonal conflicts can be intracultural or intercultural. Sometimes we don't know which. Intercultural would normally be in your neighborhood or hometown between you and your neighbors and are socio-political and can be cultural. Intercultural group differences are sociocultural in nature and very often are not recognized as intercultural conflicts, but rather interpersonal. For people who have the language of intercultural categories and for interculturally competent people who can use that language, it's easy to see this. But for those who are still in the ethnocentric stages of cultural denial, it tends to be all personal affront. I like to start with intercultural conflict for analysis because that's how I was able to begin to dialogue with others to get some traction for my own understanding of conflict at all levels. So think about your own conflicts. How do you handle them? What is your go to means of resolving conflict? How much of that ability and skill at resolving conflict comes from your personality and how much from your first culture? After all, cultures have preferred ways of resolving conflict, either directly or indirectly, right? Do you feel confident in your knowledge base such that you feel that you could readily identify an intercultural conflict and resolve it effectively and appropriately? Well, we already have the language of potential sources of intercultural conflict summarized in this chart. Each of these categories or dimensions gives us the language for identifying the main culprits of intercultural conflicts based on intercultural differences. A lot of interpersonal conflict, though, comes from one's own emotional intelligence, which is an IC person or an interculturally competent person might be called cultural intelligence. Here I borrowed from Goleman's emotional intelligence and highlighted how this could be equated with intercultural competence. Self awareness of one's culture and how it makes us default to one or another way of resolving conflict is a good start. If you can't control your emotions, no conflict will get resolved at any level, by the way. So self regulation comes in. Understanding the cultural ladder of inference covered in a previous video helps you short circuit your cultural assumptions before you get offended. Your ability to do that by self regulating is essential to being considered interculturally competent. Motivation gets at effectiveness, which is seen differently cross culturally. Selfish motives sniffed out by collectivists will be met with resistance, maybe. Neutral motivation behaviors, whatever those might be, are culturally determined, and the interculturally competent person understands that and acts accordingly. Empathy, as a good listener who understands the cultural expression of needs, belongs to the culturally intelligent person as well. And the interculturally competent person has advanced interculturally competent social skills that help them manage their cross cultural and intercultural relationships, working through those conflicts deftly and competently. Stella Ting Toomey gives us some advice on how a direct person would manage the indirect cultural others need to maintain face. Face is a social dignity that is maintained through demonstrating proper respect and not embarrassing the other in any situation. Embarrassment is loss of face. So, being mindful of this when interacting with East Asian cultures and other cultures that require face maintenance is key to those relationships to avoid conflict. I'm especially bad at this due to my sense of humor. In low-grade conflict, Ting Toomey advises be proactive. Don't push something that's not there or which cannot be dealt with at this point. Be quiet and do mindful observation of what is at work. Don't be hasty to name something to resolve it directly. Listen attentively and discard any and all culturally based assumptions. I presented this in an earlier video as short circuiting your ladder of cultural inferences. At times, you may need to let things go until the other is ready to deal with it in their own way. Easier said than done, but you learn this in experience and by having the intercultural empathy to read the other and see how they react to some of your direct pushing. I've learned this the hard way, believe me. Do you have any other recommendations that come from your own experience? Remember that our first question given to us by Weaver is the question of whether or not culture may be at work in this conflict. If someone is culturally different from us, we can assume that first, and our automatic rush to feeling offended is short-circuited. I like starting to discuss conflict in the intercultural sphere for this reason. I assume that there will be conflict between me and someone from China, and that those conflicts will be cultural. So, how do we go about resolving them? If it's my culturally similar neighbor, it becomes more complex, and the intercultural level is often not even considered, even though it's not out of the question. And again, here are the different dimensions and questions about culture that we can ask ourselves to diagnose our conflicts and help to resolve them. I have another video that deals with examples from my own life of intercultural conflict, how I have diagnosed it or more likely failed to do, and what recommendations I have for helping in similar conflicts. While I use these videos as presentations for the course I teach on intercultural competence, they are also freely available for anyone to watch. So please feel free to like it or subscribe to this channel as you see fit, or share it. Your feedback is valuable to me to make sure that things are clear. And may you find the peace that you are looking for.